Vindication is a peculiar feeling. By definition, it means that you went through a period where you were doubted, and only later did people come to realize that you had been telling the truth all along. It can be a good feeling, but it doesn't necessarily make up for the negative response you initially receive. You want people to like the things you make. If you spend hours every day working on a project, and half or more of the people who watched it responded negatively, it feels like a failure. After I made my Jim Jefferies video, this is how I felt. Although it is technically better than previous videos from an editing standpoint, I still view it as my worst video. In large part, I think I failed to properly convey my message. I also left a door open for people to make excuses for Jim. One of the most common comments or complaints was the straw man argument that I didn't think comedians could change their opinions or material over time. I never asserted this point in my video, but I was also vague enough that people could exploit this loophole in Jim's defense.
Now, I've been known to make the occasional inappropriate or sexist joke. My act is what you call an acquired taste. But I've always believed that my audience understood that those are jokes and don't represent my actual beliefs.
If there was a gradual evolution in Jim's subject matter and comedic style, I could accept that he grew as a person and changed his perspective. What we actually saw was a man who did a 180 and started criticizing people for making the same kinds of comments he had been making only a few years before.
You called a woman a dumpster.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Do you want to know who makes me come? I make me come! All the horrible thoughts I have in my fucking head makes me come! You have very little to do with it. You're just the container I shoot it into.
Even though my video showed plenty of evidence suggesting Jim's transition was superficial, there was still enough wiggle room for his supporters. What I really could have used was evidence of Jim betraying his current principles. Fast forward to March 19th, 2019. The Jim Jefferies Show produces a segment about anti-immigrant sentiment in Australia.
I was shocked to hear that the prick allegedly behind the Christchurch, New Zealand mass shootings is a white supremacist who grew up and was radicalised in Australia.
As part of this segment, they used an interview with Israeli activist Avi Yemini. As Avi explained in a video that now has almost 2 million views on YouTube, they used a 5-month-old interview in an attempt to manufacture a narrative about the Christchurch shooting, and they fraudulently edited his interview to do so.
So it's important to remember that this was filmed a few months ago, and not in response to the Christchurch massacre as they seem to be alluding here.
This is nothing new. If you watched my first video on Jefferies, or the video made by Diversity in Comics, you know that the Jim Jefferies Show is notorious for the utter lack of shame they have in dishonestly editing interviews to craft the narrative they want. There was one difference with Avi Yemini.
Luckily, I'm not an idiot, and I knew what their plan was all along. Well, they flew me to Singapore, put me in a hotel for a couple of days there. What was I to expect? It was a setup. So what I did was, I got there and I secretly put my phones down to record the entire segment.
At this point, I have to talk about editing. I'm not an expert at editing. I literally have less than a year's experience as a video editor, but in that time I have come to understand a few truths pertaining to the way in which you should edit a person's quotes. For the most part, editing is about condensing ideas. This is especially true when you're taking a structureless conversation where people can weave in and out of topics for extended periods. I can't tell you how many times I've been faced with a 10 or 20 minute long clip and wondered how I could trim out the filler and leave the important talking points without taking anything out of context, which is why I get genuinely angry when people accuse me of taking things out of context. They have no idea how hard I try not to do exactly that. For the unscrupulous individual, modern technology makes it incredibly easy to edit an interview in any dishonest way you want. When I saw the video Avi Yemini released, I was reminded of a video made by a YouTuber named Potholer54. For those of you who don't know, Potholer54 is one of the OGs of the whole YouTube debate scene. He was around during the old days of atheism versus creationism debates. More recently, he has dedicated much of his time on YouTube to the climate change debate. Beyond all of that, he is a geologist and a journalist of several decades named Peter Hadfield. The reason this is relevant to this video is because years ago, Potholer made a video showing tricks of the trade by which people can be misquoted by the media.
Now, how can we all watch the same thing and come away with a completely different understanding of what was said? Well, welcome to the wonderful world of television.
After 10 years of experiment, television, first shown to the public at the World's Fair, now takes its place as a new American art and industry. With the inauguration
I guess
of
I saw things differently because I've conducted scores of interviews for television, so when I watch an interview now, I'm not just listening to what's said, I'm looking to see where the cuts are made and where the cameras are positioned. And it's these insights I want to share with you.
I can only play a little bit of that video here, but I suggest you watch the entire thing. Potholer explains the ways interviews can be edited for print, radio, and television/video.
Here we go from a close-up to a wide shot, and that's where something's been cut. When we go back to the close-up, that's another edit. This one is so obvious it can even be heard in the audio alone.
Or for us to be kidnapped and renditioned back to the United States to be executed.
One reason for that is that an audio recording isn't consistent throughout an interview. The tone of an interviewee's voice will change, and even the quality of the recording will change as he shifts his head slightly in relation to the microphone.
What gives anyone the right to tell anyone where they can and can't live?
When you import this culture, what do you think's going to happen? Australia's going to end up the same shithole that they came from, that they were escaping.
The video has stuck with me over the years for a few reasons. I think we all know the media is lying to us, but it's very interesting to see exactly how they do it, and how imperceptible the lies can be. Another reason this video has stuck with me is the notion that frequently the lie isn't being told to push any agenda. Interviews are often edited in deceptive ways because we have grown to expect a seamless standard of editing from the media. Ironically, our desire for seamless editing has allowed unscrupulous individuals like Jim Jefferies to fraudulently manipulate interviews in such a way that they can create any storyline they want. This was clearly the plan with the Richard C. Meyer interview, but Meyer knew what they were going to do and gave them nothing to work with.
Okay, so how do you feel about this black Superman? Okay, a slightly less black Superman.
Yeah, no, that's actually better.
When you look at the end result, it's painfully obvious that the show had chopped the interview up trying to find some way Meyer's quotes could be taken out of context or misrepresented.
What are your thoughts on the current state of comic books?
Comics are kind of weirdly dying politics, specifically identity politics being shoved into everything.
It was so badly mangled that even comic book social justice warriors were upset by the failure. With Avi Yemini, Jim went even further. As Avi explained, he had two requests going into the interview.
Now, I agreed with two conditions. One, there'll be no neo-Nazi or Nazi sympathisers on the same segment because I don't want to be aligned to them and I don't want to give them any legitimacy or anything like that. Common sense. The second one was that they don't cut my answers from one question and put it to another. Now, to my horror, but not my surprise, they did exactly both.
As we see when comparing Avi's hidden camera video with the official video from the Jim Jefferies show, answers were blatantly cut and rearranged to unrelated questions after the fact.
Really?
Borders,
I know borders, but wouldn't it just be nice if we got to a place in society where we had a utopia, where we all just lived as
on a level, I agree.
You may say I'm a dreamer.
I think most people, sensible people would agree with you in theory.
Yeah.
But in practice, it's not. It goes against human nature. It just doesn't work.
What gives anyone the right to tell anyone where they can and can't live?
Most people, sensible people would agree with you in theory.
Yeah.
But in practice, it's not. It goes against human nature. It just doesn't work.
What gives anyone the right to tell anyone where they can and can't live?
When you import this culture, what do you think's going to happen? Australia's going to end up the same shithole that they came from, that they were escaping.
This is so far beyond even the usual level of deceptive editing that it's almost impressive. In my opinion, the most crucial aspect of this entire incident were the comments made by Jim when he thought he could have them edited out, especially his comments about Muslims.
So Muhammad is considered the perfect man.
Right, yes.
Okay?
You can't draw a picture of it.
No, don't you dare, don't you dare. I've got enough death threats on me, brother.
There he is.
Jesus Christ.
There he is. He looks like a wobbly ghost. Stupid and demeaning and all these things. Islam or dingo?
Islam and dingo sneaky?
Yeah.
Probably both.
Probably both. Dangerous?
Right. Probably both.
Probably both.
The dingo ate the baby. It turned out it did eat the baby.
If it ain't a bloody Muslim baby, it would have vomited.
No, I don't actually
that's
agree
not
with
that
that.
shit, isn't it? I'm only joking.
But that's not funny. You're talking about fucking killing kids.
No, it's not
That's
funny.
crossing a line. There's a fucking line.
We'll edit this bit out. I never look bad in these interviews.
That makes me feel vindicated. That clip alone proves everything I said about Jim being a disingenuous phony to be true. He doesn't believe any of the horseshit he's saying on his show. He's saying whatever they pay him to say. It's no surprise to me that he makes statements during interviews that are Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, racist. Pick a fucking ick or an ist. He says these things and gets away with them because he controls the editing, just like he has filed copyright claims to take down videos where he admitted to drugging a teen for sex.
Cut to 5 years earlier, I fucked her at the Edinburgh Festival when she was performing in a play with her grandfather. Back then she was 17 years old. I didn't know. I met her in a bar, but it's also, may I add, that that's legal in the UK. That's age of consent, so I didn't do anything wrong. I did ply her full of ecstasy, so I'm no fucking, but not like in drug, but we were taking ecstasy all night. Anyway, right. And
then you got on a plane with a guy with the military.
Yeah, and then I had sex with her.
So, what does this all mean? Well, it shows that Jim Jefferies using deceptive editing to alter interviews wasn't just a fluke with Richard Meyer. If that had been a one-time deal, he might have gotten a pass. The Avi Yemini hidden camera footage not only shows that the Jim Jefferies show knowingly manipulates interviews to craft the narrative they want, it also shows that Jim Jefferies himself is aware of these practices and uses them to his advantage. This fact is more important than most people will recognize at first. As with Inside Amy Schumer, there is always the excuse that the host shouldn't be held responsible for the actions of the rest of the crew. With Big Amy, we have no idea how much she was responsible for. We now have hard evidence that Jim knows his team will edit the interviews deceptively, and takes advantage of that fact. As I said in my first video, I don't want to get Jim cancelled. I don't want comedians to lose their jobs over jokes. What I don't want are deliberately dishonest and hypocritical assholes like Jim Jefferies being able to build a career on offensive jokes, and then pretend they've had a change of heart once they become successful. For one thing, it's a pathetic attempt to gatekeep other comedians who would try to build a career on telling offensive jokes, so people like Jefferies and Schumer can stomp out the little guy before they have a chance to replace them as king shit naughty comic. More importantly, I don't want a guy who publicly bashed the Quran, called Muslims muzzies, and drew Muhammad lecturing me about tolerating Islam.
Then there's our Muslim friends. The fucking muzzies are mental. Thank fuck the muzzies don't drink, because they'd be out of control if they fucking did. Covering women's faces and cutting clitorises off isn't just a bit of culture, right? You see this microphone? I'm calling it Muhammad, right? And it's fucking gay. It's a gay microphone called Muhammad, and all it wants to do is roll the Quran up and fuck itself up the ass.
As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking and subscribing. If you would like to support my channel, please check out my Twitter and Patreon. And a special thanks to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you. Mo Dowd, Jeff Carpenter, Adam Carey, Unfortunate Mishap, Danny, SF69er, Lara Williams, Mersh, Andrew Owens, The Love from Up Above, Jackie, Kevin Howard, Yuko, Thomas Drahi, James Taylor, Jack, Irina Volkova, Bone CK, and Wrestling Soup.